Hey, I'm Duke on Twitch. If you want to support the channel and greensunzenith.com, you can find my Patreon, merch store, and singles store where you can buy singles through TCG Player or Card Hoarder in the video description. If you want to get in contact, you can also find all that info in the description below for things like donation deck lists or just wanting to reach out. Alright, let's get right into it.
Hey, welcome back to Dukes on Twitch. Back today with a deck tech for Legacy BANT Maverick with a bit of a spin thanks to Modern Horizons 3. So this version is playing Nadu Winged Wisdom, which I'm sure many of you are well aware of. I think Travis, aka Disgruntled Elk, put it really well as Nadu being the Hogak of MH3. This is a 3-mana, 3/4 flyer, already a pretty good creature. Legendary as well, which is relevant in Legacy for things like Karakas. And it has creatures you control have, so the creatures, it's not Nadu's ability. Whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put it into your hand. This ability triggers only twice each turn, so each creature has this. One thing to note as well is that obviously with lands coming into play untapped, you might amass mana, you might play another copy of Nadu, and what happens there is the new Nadu resets all the triggers, which is really nice. So if you have, say, Shuko, Nadu, and Noble Hierarch in play, and you put Shuko on Noble Hierarch twice, Nadu twice, and you cast another Nadu, you can then target the Noble Hierarch twice again with the Shuko and get sort of new Nadu abilities, which is pretty crazy. So in this version of Maverick, I've dedicated around 10 slots for Nadu. This has definitely grown as I've played more with it. And instead of Nadu just being a 1 or 2 of as a Green Sun's target, the more you play with it, the more you realize how powerful it is and how much you want to build around it. And what I've done by building around it is kind of built around it in a Maverick style way. So using cards like Stoneforge Mystic, which obviously you've seen play in many different iterations of different Maverick archetypes. Field of the Dead is another way you can kind of win the game. I guess you can win the game with Field of the Dead, especially if you're putting lands in off the Nadu triggers. Field can very quickly become a reality. Urza's Saga is quite nice because it itself is a threat and it does find Shuko, which is kind of one of the main reasons or ways we're seeing Nadu taken advantage of in Legacy right now. Shuko pretty sweet. So obviously 1 mana comes off Urza's Saga. The equipped creature gets +1/+0, small effect, a little bit like an Exalted effect. And the equip being 0 is the main thing. So once it's in play, very easy to move around from creature to creature. Boots, obviously, as well, just a really good equipment piece that comes off Urza's Saga. It's quite cheap in cost as well. I do have a Jide here, just for some of the more mid-range decks and some of the fair decks, is like an extra piece of removal for smaller creatures, where BANT, in my opinion, over the years has really been quite lackluster with the amount of removal you get to run. I did just do a league with Prismatic Ending, which I found pretty good, but when you think of black, you think of, August Bowmasters, Grist, Old School, Assassin's Trophy, Abrupt Decay, Golgari Charm, Zealous Persecution. In red, you have Renin 6, now gone. Minsk, to some extent. Punishing Fire is a big one. Sometimes Bolts, etc. But BANT with blue, you're really looking at ways to either play mid-range with things like Uro, some control stuff like Flusterstorm, which is also quite good against combo. But in terms of really good removal, it's really just the swords you have. And I do like the flexibility of Prismatic Ending, but being able to use Jide to get rid of smaller creatures and then rely on your swords to get rid of large creatures is quite nice. Potentially even use Jide to make your threats bigger and more threatening, which might make your opponent chump block, which is nice as well. But I still think Jide is up to par. And honestly, as just a creature player, I love playing with Jide. So that's why it's there. I would say it's probably the flex spot of the 10. It's not really included for the Nadu, but it's there because I kind of want to have something for Stoneforge that's there that isn't a Cauldron or a Batterskull that you kind of rely on the Stoneforge to have. I think if pre-formal wear was on MTGO, that would definitely be the slot. And then just rounding it out with the two Stoneforge Mystics as ways to find these. But Nadu's been sweet. Since it's come out, we've seen a lot of different versions of the deck online. I'll quickly go over. Danny Batterman had a really great list that they took down a local Legacy event with, calling it Fruit Loops. And this was a version built around the Cephalid Breakfast combo, which is obviously a great shell to have it in, and potentially the most competitive shell to have it in as well. To have Force and sometimes even Daze or Teferi as ways to protect your combo, Ponders and Brainstorms to find them. And then, of course, you do have the Nadus, but you also just have the Breakfast combo to go off with, which is really cool. So it is another way to go down to 0 cards in your deck without drawing. So it is another way to win through Oracle, which is pretty sweet. One thing to note in this list as well is the Delighted Halflings, which allow you to cast your Teferis and your Nadus as uncounterable. So I think this deck is really nice because it's a combo deck that also has kind of that really good mid-range plan, which is already quite strong with Stoneforge Mystic and Urza Saga. But now having Nadu is, yeah, pretty crazy. So that's pretty sweet. I know that Fish Duggery also had a list very similar, although this one was a little bit unique because it wasn't running the actual Cephalid combo. It was more mid-range. It was still playing the Nomads and Core because the activated ability of Nomads, which targets, is 0. So you can, of course, do that as many times as you want. But as a Maverick player, I really like this list because I don't have too much interest in combo. And yeah, this plays really well to kind of the BANT Maverick style while also having things like Ponder, Brainstorm, Force. Yeah, really cool. This is just a little showing of a game I was playing against, a game I was playing just last night, where this is the board state. So my opponent has an 8/8 patchwork. I'm on 3. We're kind of in the position of chump blocking, potentially getting the knight bigger. And then we drew the Nadu. And then obviously with the Shuko in play and many creatures in play already, you're just able to pretty much skull clamp your way out of the game, which is pretty nice. With Knight as well on board, it means that if I want to go and find something like Field of the Dead, I can. I actually made an issue, a pretty big misplay there. I should have gotten rid of the second Savannah instead of my first Forest, because it would have triggered the field a lot sooner. But you can see here how crazy it is, how it's just going wide and really giving you a bit of inevitability. The other matchup that I really liked it in was Delver, because Delver has a lot of 3-powered creatures that fly. So not only having a 3/4 blocker, but a 3/4 blocker where they're probably going to try to bolt it to kill it, which of course triggers the Nadu, which just draws you a card. So having that sort of card advantage against a deck like Delver is really sweet. So going back to the list, a few like little changes here. I did like Scryb Ranger. Obviously Scryb Ranger is another way to target your creatures. You can do it at instant speed and once a turn. So that's pretty cool. I did also have a Hedge Maze, which fits well into the Field of the Dead strategy, but also just having a bit of control over the top of your deck is really nice in a deck like Maverick that has moved away from cards like Sylvan Library, especially since the printing of Orcish Bowmasters. So having the Maze in there is sweet. The 3 basics isn't too different, but obviously one being snow covered means that it is a different basic for Field of the Dead, which is nice. We do have the 4 Green Suns, which means we pretty much have 7 copies of Nadu, which might sound like a lot, but just trust me, when you start off with 1 or 2 as a target, you just move towards more because it's just so strong. And I'm not going to make any early judgment calls on how strong it is and if there's anything coming for it, but I wouldn't be surprised if over the coming months, especially as more players pick up MH3 cards, that there could be a target on some heads. One thing you'll note is that we do only have the 2 Knights, which I think is enough for Mav right now, especially with a build with Nadu. You don't want to have too many 3-drops, and the Knights are still really good against the decks where they're great like lands and other depth decks. Usually the first is just good enough. The second is a bit of a luxury. So I haven't been too unhappy there. And I think with Nadu as well, just hitting lands, it plays a similar role, especially when you're wanting Knight to help out with your mana. Nadu can do the same. And then just 4 Noble Hierarchs. I really like mana dorks that can attack. And obviously in Bant, Noble's just where it's at. Done a lot of work. One thing to note as well is that with Nadu, and especially with Shuko, for every land that comes into play, if you have one land in play and then you play a 1-mana creature, it is pretty much free because the Shuko will then give you 2 more draws. If you get another land into play or even 2 lands, you can play a 2-drop and then get 2 in. Do not play Collector Ouphe and then think you can still change Shuko. I nearly made that mistake. But yeah, don't do that. Like 2 Thalias and 3 Mums. Mums are obviously also a way to target your creatures, which trigger Nadu, which is nice. Karakas triggers Nadu as well on itself. So you might even get the situation where your opponent has tried to, say, Unholy Heat for 6 the Nadu, and it triggers and you reveal Karakas from the top, put it into play, then return the Nadu in response. That's definitely on my bingo list. But yeah, overall, I felt like the inclusion of Nadu was quite natural for Maverick. A lot of the cards that I'm adding in aren't that bad on their own. Shuko probably the closest to it in that it is a 1-mana artifact that gives your creature +1/+0. Not that great, but you know, Field of the Dead, I don't mind. It is the 24th land, typically Maverick running around 23 without the depths stage combo that we've been seeing recently. But yeah, I think overall the shell has worked really well. I find that the Green Sun's targets left have a real job to do. Collector Ouphe as well, great against opposing Shuko decks and against opposing sort of combo decks that we're seeing right now. So yeah, really happy with how this deck is ever changing, but this is where it is currently. To the board, we actually have a new card as well in Vexing Bauble, which is, I think, probably one of the... It has got a bit of hype, but there are a lot of strategies that this hits in Legacy, especially fast combo. So having another 1-mana interactive spell is really nice. It pretty much acts like a Deafening Silence, but it just keeps everything at bay. Like in Bant, you might think of Meddling Mage. Like, why aren't you playing Meddling Mage? But when you think of Vexing Bauble, whenever I play a caster spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. Vexing Bauble straight away is pretty much a Meddling Mage naming both LED and Lotus Petal, if not Chrome Mox as well. So that is really cool. That's kind of how I see Deafening Silence. Deafening Silence is kind of like a Meddling Mage for ritual effects, Galvanic Relay. There's a lot of cards that Deafening Silence subtly names when it comes into play. It's just like, these cards are now not really relevant until you deal with them. And then the traps are really just in case you're on the draw and you do want to have a bit more grunt. But playing Bant, we do have ways to just get to 4 mana, especially with the mana acceleration start through Noble Hierarch. You do typically have access to 4 blue as of turn 4, if not turn 3. So being able to just hardcast Mindbreak Trap as a counterspell if needed has been pretty sweet. Force of Vigor, I think 2 Force is pretty much staple in the lists that I play because it just gives you the time against a lot of decks that power out artifacts and enchantments. So against lands, which typically is a pretty decent matchup, the Saga Mox or Mox Exploration starts, Force is brutal against. Against any of the affinity lists, Force is really nice at just making sure we get to turn 1, we get to turn 2, we get to turn 3. I do have the Haywire Might there as well as just a nice way to get that sort of effect off the Saga. It also deals with Kaldra nicely, which if we're seeing more Stoneblade lists, I expect more Kaldra as well. And yeah, Doorkeeper Thrull I think is still worth it. We don't have any ETBs ourselves other than Endurance, which is nice. So, hitting D&T is pretty big. Chrome Mox, it does hit, but I don't typically slide it in against combo that aggressively. But I think Doorkeeper Thrull is a great way to make sure that opposing creature decks that have a lot of value attached to them like Recruit of the Guard, Stoneforge Mystic, Flick Wisps, Calculate Apparition, Solitude. There's a lot pre-formal wear. It also stops the germs from coming in of Batterskull and Kaldra. I do really like Thrull. And then Path. I would like to find a probably Dismember, potentially for Path. The downside of Path is that it's not a great removal spell for decks like Death and Taxes, where you have turn 1 threats like Mother of Runes that you want to deal with, but the mana for them is just so good that, you know, if they can play a turn 2 Recruiter to speed up the turn, or, you know, play a Stoneforge and Wasteland you, it can be pretty tough to come back from. So the Path is nice because it does hit things like Archon of Cruelty, Phyrexian Dreadnought, creatures that are out of the bounds of Dismember. Dismember a bit nicer if you're thinking of things like, obviously, Mother of Runes, Goblin Lackey, opposing Noble Hierarchs if you have a mana denial start. Magus of the Moon is a big one as well. It still kills Grief, the Troll. Dismember still has a lot of hits, but you do have to take into consideration the 4 life against decks like Delver, where, you know, a daze on the Dismember has definitely happened before, and that 4 life is pretty brutal. In many games, that's a whole turn of damage. So I think I'll always be going back and forth between, you know, Path and Dismember, and maybe even finding room for something else like Prismatic Ending, which is a bit more flexible but slower. So yeah. And then Tower of the Magistrate, it does sometimes slow down opposing Shuko decks because you can target the creature with Shuko on the stack, so it can't be equipped. It does stop Cephalid from going off with Shuko because you can give the Cephalid Wizard, the blue creature, protection from artifacts. You can obviously target germs as well off a lot of the Kaldra and Batterskull equipment. So yeah, I do think Tower is just another nice way to deal with some of the actual issues that we do face, which is Kaldra. So yeah, I really like where the deck is, and I hope you do too. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Definitely happy to get back to you. I would say this is a work in progress, but it's been really nice to kind of shape the deck as I play. And I'll probably also upload some gameplay that I did just for some off-camera leagues that actually turned out pretty well. So hope you enjoyed this. Hopefully you enjoy the Nadu content because it's really fun to play. It might not be that fun to play against, but I'm all for it.